Hello APUSH students. Today we are going to go over the really brief version of America in World War II. So definitely make a quick pause, get out your notes, paper and pencil and those types of things so we can go ahead and get started. Again, this is a really brief overview version, but again, that is what we are going to be doing here today. Also, make a note, there are going to be a lot of links in the description down below for different videos because this particular section we would be looking at lots of videos from that time period in class, and so I've tried to find as many of those on YouTube as I can to have it so then you guys can watch those. So definitely look through those below. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So we have to start off with foreign policy in the 30s because remember World War II actually starts in the mid to late 30s. However, the United States does not get involved until after Pearl Harbor in 1941. Right? So definitely make a note that the U.S. is involved in World War II from 1941 to 1945. Right? So foreign policy, right? So we're going to start off and again, I have these all separated a lot just so then we can see all the images a little bit better and to have that, kind of transition here and there. So we start off, we have a good neighbor policy. We got a poster that's going along with this. We'll see lots of posters today, but you can see that this is between Mexico and the United States and also all of Latin America. Right, so this is just reinforcing that Roosevelt corollary that Teddy Roosevelt established, where it was the idea we're going to protect Latin America from European involvement, and so it's just kind of a reestablishment that we will be good neighbors to our neighbors to the south. We are also going to recognize the Soviet Union since they have now become the Soviet Union, they're no longer Russia. Definitely during the time period when Russia is a communist country, we do want to use the term Soviet Union and not Russia, just so then we have that terminology there that kind of shows that we know that they are a communist country, not a democracy or a monarchy. Okay, so that's a big deal since they're going to be part of the Allies, and then the United States will join and will be in the Allies with the Soviet Union during World War II. It's not until the Cold War after World War II that the United States and Soviet Union are going to be enemies. Okay, so we're buddies at this point. Right, we had already talked about the neutrality acts, so we just again want to add these in just for that context of what's happening in the 1930s. So here again, there's lots of neutrality acts. We're kind of boiling it down to the big topics here, right? So we have two listed here, 1935 and 1936. So with this, all right, is that we have no arms and no travel to parts of Europe, and this is influenced by this group called the Nye Committee. The Nye Committee is going to be a group of people that gather together to investigate World War I and how the U.S. was entering the war for profit, and so they had this recommendation that, hey, maybe you shouldn't make the same mistakes from the First World War, and so we should not be traveling there. So think about like the Lusitania from World War I, right? And we should not be trading arms. And so think about all of the U-boats that sunk American ships and Allied ships in the First World War. So we're trying to learn from our mistakes. So that's good. Right? We then amend that and add that we shouldn't give loans or credit to the Allies either. So again, really trying to say that we are not even going to be involved monetarily with Europe. So definitely some strong ideas here in these neutrality acts in the middle of the 30s. But remember, this is also the Great Depression for us. We don't have any money to give. So until it becomes necessary for us to get involved, we got to take care of our own at this point because things are obviously very, very bad. And again, we're going to see lots of cartoons today from Dr. Seuss. All right, here we have the neutrality acts and how his beard is being tried to be pulled into the war. Okay, all right. Now, another group that is going to be against us getting involved in a lot of things, but also be a little different than what we've seen before is the America's First Committee. All right, so this committee is going to be FDR, right? They're going to speak out against him, thinking that he is the problem with the Depression and that his idea of Keynesian economics, spending all this money to make money, is going to bring the country to its knees, right? That it's going to just destroy the United States. Their spokesperson that they're going to pick for the country is going to be Charles Lindbergh, so the famous pilot. Everyone knows him, he's a celebrity, and so he's going to be the one who's speaking at all these engagements as a representative of this America's First Committee. However, this committee actually said that obviously that FDR is the problem, but that we should actually be allies with Hitler and Germany during the mid to late 30s and even in these early 40s. So obviously problematic historically, but let's check out some of these cartoons that we got going on here from Dr. Seuss. Obviously, we can tell there's a bias here with Dr. Seuss where he does not care for this America's First Committee, and it makes sense. So our first one here, we have this giant dragon looking thing, and it obviously is supposed to be Hitler, has swastikas all over it. And here is Lindbergh. All right, I love it when everything's labeled, it makes our lives a little bit easier. All right, Lindbergh is patting him on the head, so obviously friendly. And he says, "'Tis Roosevelt, not Hitler, that the world should really fear." So again, this America's First Committee thinks that FDR and his policies for the Great Depression and his New Deal are going to really ruin the United States economically, and that we should really be allying with Hitler during this time period. Okay. All right, our next cartoon here. Again, the lady is labeled America First, so she's the America's First Committee, and she's reading a story, Adolf the Wolf, to these two little kids. And the caption says that the wolf chewed up the children and spit out their bones, but those are foreign children and it really didn't matter. So again, this America's First Committee has some of these very extreme views that America should always put themselves first beyond anyone else, even if, there's bad things happening around the world. So it's, obviously a controversial topic. All right, in our last picture here, we have Lindbergh, that he's wearing like a gas mask because he's on a giant pile of trash. The trash pile is called the Nazi anti-Semite stink wagon, and it says, "Spreading this lovely Goebbels stuff." Goebbels is the Nazi propagandist. So anytime if you are interested in World War II and you're reading different things about the Nazi leadership, one of the main people in there that is going to be influencing policy and ideology is going to be Goebbels. And so really fascinating things that we can find out from Goebbels and his propaganda, but fascinating because it's really horrible, awful things. But again, fascinating just to be like, oh my gosh, how did people do these types of things at the time? But again, this America's First Committee, anytime we see further on through our video of things that the United States is trying to do to get us closer and closer to war, the America's First Committee is going to be like, no, 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 we shouldn't be doing that. Okay. All right, we talked before in another video about the quarantine speech. We actually read a small excerpt from it. So that is happening here in kind of our timeline of foreign policy before the war, before we get involved in the war. So remember, quarantine speech was saying that we can't just stay quarantined and it'll go away. We will eventually have to get involved. And then we're going to modify those neutrality acts to now say cash and carry. So basically the idea of we will carry stuff to you and you have to pay us cash. Because again, this was trying to get us out of that depression, and it starts to slowly work. Okay, cash and carry will be replaced by Lend-Lease here in a little bit. All right, 1940, we're going to have the Selective Service Act. This is a draft. And so remember, we don't get involved in the war until December of 1941, so basically almost 1942. And so 1940, 2 years earlier, we are going to have a draft in order to create a peacetime military. Basically, the idea was that we wanted to have, to train people so that they would be ready to when we would have to get involved in the war. And so with this, I get to add in a picture of my grandpa, right? So you can kind of see we kind of look alike. Our eyes are at least the same. He fought in Italy and North Africa during the war. And so again, with this peacetime military, the America's First Committee is obviously going crazy, and they're like, what are you doing? Because they realize they see the writing on the wall that we are going to eventually get involved in this war. And then FDR gives a speech called the Arsenal of Democracy speech. There will be in the description down below, a video that is going to have part of this speech in it and some other information. All the videos below, I tried to keep them really short, so you can kind of click through them and, again, get that extra content of what's going on. But basically remember that arsenal means that we're piling up weapons, right? And so it's this idea we're going to have these factories building all these weapons in order to defend democracy. Okay, another speech by FDR is the For Freedom speech, right? He gives lots and lots of speeches. He's a great speaker. And in this speech, he is saying that we should defend ourselves, right? Because we need to protect freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. So here we have 4 famous paintings from, from Rockwell, sorry. I had a moment I could remember his name. Some from Norman Rockwell is who paints these. This is probably the one of the Thanksgiving that you've seen adaptations of before. But this idea that the reason we have a democracy, the reason that we have the United States and all these things is because these are things we hold dear. The idea of having a freedom of religion, freedom of speech, having the ability to have food and not be fearful of tyranny. And so again, kind of going back to those early Declaration of Independence themes. And again, we're going to have that speech video down below. And again, it's not the whole speech, it is a smaller version of it. Right. So then we get our Lend-Lease Act. Again, we talked about this before. All right. So again, we just want to put it in historical context here, all right, of when things are happening. So Great Britain is purchasing things on credit. So again, we're leasing something, all right, you're making a payment. And again, this is trying getting us more involved in the war. This is ending the Depression because we're putting people to work. Again, those people that are against the war, like the America's First Committee, are like, holy crap, we're getting involved, and they are not happy with this. But this is March of 41. Again, we get involved in the war in December of 41. Before we are even involved in the war, all right, little Lego Churchill here, we're going to have the Atlantic Charter. This is one of those historical events I always find really fascinating because it is a secret meeting on a boat out in the middle of the Atlantic between Churchill and FDR, where they're talking about peace after the war. The US isn't even involved yet, and they're already kind of making plans. So you can at least say that they're really good planners, right? They're trying their best to come up with lots of good ideas. And again, we had already talked earlier about Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941, a day which will live in infamy, right? And again, another speech there from FDR, right? So that's all the things getting us involved in the war itself. We're now going to go to the home front, and after we finish home front, we will get to some of the battles. And again, this is a really brief overview of all U.S. involvement in the war. We're not going to get into nitty-gritty into a lot of battles, only the major turning points here and there. Okay, all right, so for the home front, all right, we're going to start off with war mobilization. We saw this with World War I. We get a war productions board just like World War I, and so again, it's going to be like places like Henry Ford's factories are now going to not make cars, but they're going to be making airplanes, right? And we have, again, this great arsenal of democracy. Right, so here we got our little guy that is shopping, and he has his bombs, his airplanes, and his naval ships. So again, this is what's really bringing us out of the Depression, this mass production that we're having in the country. Right, we're going to have the Office of Price Administration. These guys are going to make sure that no one is gouging prices, so we can definitely kind of relate to this in our current times. All right, we want to make sure that people aren't charging a lot of money for products that are in high demand, right? And so some of the things they're going to do during this time period is they're rationing things, right, just like we saw in World War I, right? Specifically here, oil, rubber, and tin. All right, and so we got some cartoons going on here, some advertisements. So here there's saving kitchen fat because that fat has glycerin in it and that can be used to make bombs and bullets. People are sharing cars, so carpooling. During rationing, they're going to have ration books. So that's what this picture is down here. All right, and what ration books were is that you got like a book full of stamps, and these stamps showed you how much meat you could get that week for your family, how much produce you could get, this and that, and so you would turn those in, kind of like tickets, if you will, to get your share of those particular products. Again, to make sure that no one is hoarding materials that we need and that everyone is getting their fair share. Okay, because we have a limited supply on things, people are going to start creating gardens, all right, in their backyards. This is actually going to be a huge thing all across the country at the time, and we're going to call them victory gardens. So anytime you see V anywhere, it's going to be victory. Also, a thing with this is that when you make a peace sign, what we would think a peace sign with your fingers that makes a V, that originally is going to be V for victory. And obviously, if you have victory, then you're going to have peace. And so that's kind of the transition of that particular symbol. But again, victory gardens, you're actually seeing some news articles nowadays of people making their own victory gardens now. I think it's just because people are needing something extra to do. If you have a victory garden that you are creating, definitely share those pictures with me. I totally want to see them. Maybe add a little victory garden sign in there. Victory against Corona. It would be great. So, it's one of those things that I am seeing some articles here and there in the news about that. People are also buying war bonds. We've talked about war bonds before. A bond is where you're just buying something from the government, and then say in 20 years you will cash that in and it will be worth more than what you paid for it. So it's like an investment. And so again, we got lots of posters here and there. This poster might look familiar. It's on the wall of our classroom. Okay, we'll eventually get back there, I promise. Right, just not today. Right. Some other pictures of things that are happening is women had to ration a lot of their clothing because things were not available. So during this time period, nylon is what our pantyhose were made out of, and that was obviously a fashionable thing at the time. And so women were not able to get these nylons because we used nylon to make parachutes. So what women would do is they would use makeup. I know it looks like paint, but here it's like a giant thing of makeup. She is putting that on her legs to make it look like she's wearing nylons, and then the nylons at the time would have a seam up the back. So they would use an eyeliner pencil to draw that on the back of their legs so it looked like they were wearing nylons, but they really weren't. Also, you'd have things in magazines and newspapers about how you could take the hem of your dress, make it smaller, and then use that as a belt, since obviously the leather or rubber or steel that is part of that belt is going to be used going to be recycled for other materials. And again, people are doing this all the time. I'm going to try to find some extra videos for you guys of all of this rationing and reusing of products, and I'm going to put those all down below. There's going to be, again, a lot of videos in that description below. Right. We got our Office of War Administration. And so this is going to be dealing with propaganda and making sure people know what is the right things to do versus the wrong things to do. We're going to have lots of cartoons with this. You can kind of see from some of the titles I have here. Again, I'm going to find the YouTube videos that relate to those and put those below. But Donald Duck is definitely going to be in a lot of them. There's lots of Disney and Warner Brothers cartoons that they make during World War II. Definitely check some of those out. It'll be a fun time to watch some of those. However, do make sure to note that this is the 1940s when they're being made, so there might be there will be some references to different groups of people that are going to be racist. So just keep that in mind, okay? But other than that, they are pretty fun little cartoons here and there. Right. This poster you might have seen before. It is also in the classroom. All right, so quiet, know your place, shut your face. This is the idea that you might know secret information and you don't know who is listening. There could be spies amongst us, so definitely keep your mouth shut. All right. Another thing we're going to see with this time period is the Manhattan Project. This is the code name for the project where they're making the atomic bomb. Obviously, it's not happening in Manhattan, New York. It's going to be happening in Los Alamos, New Mexico. Robert Oppenheimer is the lead physicist on this project. He's going to get Albert Einstein to assist him in creating this new weapon, this new technology. Everyone who lived at Los Alamos, New Mexico, they had to stay there. They were never allowed to leave because, again, of this possible leaking of information. Obviously, we're going to get to our rationale of using that weapon later on when we get to some battles, right? So definitely lots of stuff going on with that. All right, now for impact on society, again, I know that this is going to be a really brief kind of look at a lot of different things, but we usually think of Rosie the Riveter with this. We had to add in Miss Beeman's little baby here, all right, dressed up for Halloween as Rosie. But we're going to see tons of stuff like that, and this is usually the iconic image that we think of with women during the war, but we're going to look at a lot of different groups as well. Okay, so for African Americans, we're going to start up with A. Philip Randolph. So if we would have a list of African American leaders throughout U.S. history during the 1940s, A. Philip Randolph is going to be the leader of the African American civil rights movement during that time period. Again, we're going to see this idea of V as in victory. He's going to have a double V campaign, so double victory. It's supposed to be victory against the fascist abroad and victory against discrimination here at home, right? And so he will be successful in that, where he's going to get this executive order from FDR to end discrimination in government jobs, right? So there is going to be a little bit of that, but he has to threaten a march on Washington in order to convince FDR to do this. The only reason FDR is not super on board with doing this at the time, it's just because we're in a war. And so he's kind of busy. It's not that he's, saying that he doesn't want to do this. It's more of the idea of like he has bigger fish to fry. And that's probably why you haven't heard of A. Philip Randolph, because civil rights ideas and policies are going to kind of go on the back burner because we're in the middle of a war, right? And that, that makes sense. But again, it's still a time where people need to continue to fight for rights and everything like that, right? So we're going to see increased membership in the NAACP, and we're going to have a new group here, CORE. CORE stands for the Congress of Racial Equality, right? And both of those groups are still around today, right? We're going to move on to Mexican Americans and Native Americans, right? So Mexican Americans, we're going to have an event called the Zoot Suit Riots that are going to be happening. For a Zoot Suit, just so you know what it is, it's just a kind of like a fancy suit during this time period that was popular. If you've seen the movie The Mask with Jim Carrey, that crazy, really bright outfit that he's wearing, that is a Zoot Suit. Okay, so kind of like as a mental reference. So with this is that we have, during the United States, during the 30s and 40s, anyone who was working in farms was allowed to cross into the United States freely, work on those farms, and then cross back into Mexico freely. We had this kind of exchange program going on during the harvest seasons, and so it was, pretty normal. Everybody was okay with it. And so this is an agreement to kind of help out with agriculture during the time, especially once we start seeing more and more people joining the war effort and these men are gone off at war. Okay, so we need to replace those people. And so, we're doing all this sort of stuff. However, with this is you're also going to have a lot of people who don't want to go back to Mexico. So we're going to have a large influx of Mexicans into the LA area. And so with this large influx of people, you are going to see some resentment that's going to be happening. This riot happens in 1943, and you can see in this picture here, we have two sailors in the foreground, right? And so basically, since you have a naval base in that location, if they're going to be on leave and come on shore for a little bit, and then they're going out and seeing all of these Mexicans living in that area, you're going to see some resentment here and there. All right, think about if people are out at a club dancing, there's arguments that happen, and a riot ensued. Okay, obviously racism is at the bottom of all of this. Okay, for American Indians, during World War II, we are going to have this group of people, the Navajo, and they're going to be called the Navajo Code Talkers. All right, I'm going to have a couple videos that go along with this down below, but basically we are going to use them as our codes, okay, out in the Pacific. So if you've seen the movie, the Imitation Game, about the Enigma machine of the Germans having this code that the British eventually broke. We're having that same thing happen here in the United States, but instead of having a machine, we have the Navajo people. The Navajo language is only a spoken language, it's not written down, and it is a very difficult, complex language, and so with that, the Japanese were never able to figure out what Navajo was, right? They couldn't figure out what the language was saying. And so we had these guys, these Navajo Indians, were spread out throughout the Pacific, and they are going to be the radio operators, and they're going to be communicating back and forth so that that way we can have secret information being sent. Okay, the secret code, which is just the Navajo language. was very successful. The Japanese never broke the code. Okay. So again, I'm going to have a video there that's going to be a trailer for a movie about this. So definitely watch that if you want, if you have access, but also another one that will be down below that will help out a little bit as well. Okay. Because again, an interesting topic that I don't think gets enough press about, if you will. Right. For Japanese Americans, obviously when you're reading through stuff, you're going to see all the things dealing with the internment camps, right? So the internment camps start off as the United States policy because we are scared of what happened at Pearl Harbor. We're scared of spies that are amongst us, okay? Of all the things that we do during World War II, this one definitely is, this was a bad decision. But again, people make rash poor decisions when they are scared. Okay, and this is definitely an example of one of them. One of your podcast options for period 7 is on the internment camps. It is a really, really good one. I would highly, highly recommend it. They go into firsthand accounts from different people, tell a lot of stories of just how crazy things were. To give you an example, anyone who was of any Japanese descent was supposed to go to these camps. So we can see in these pictures, even children are going to them. Now, to give you an idea of how extreme it's going to be, there are stories of small children, so infants, who are of Japanese descent, who have been adopted by white families. And they were sent to the camps. It was required under the executive order from the president that anyone of Japanese descent was to go to these camps. I'm sorry, a baby cannot be a spy. That's a bit much. And so that particular podcast I definitely highly would recommend for you guys to listen to, just because it's one of the much better ones that I've seen here and there, just because of the amount of information that is in there. There is a court case, Korematsu versus the United States, where they're challenging this internment camp ruling. The Supreme Court will uphold the government policy of internment during wartime. Okay, so this case is lost, and the Supreme Court says, no, we are allowed to intern people during a war. Obviously, it's supposed to be temporary, so when the war is over, they were told that they were all going to be free, but we still are going to have these internment camps. These images I have here are from George Takei. If you don't know George Takei, he is famous for being one of the main characters in Star Trek. He's also on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and all sorts of social media, and he's a comedian. He is hilarious. So definitely follow if you are wanting some extra content. But when he was a small child, you can see him here and here, right? He was in an internment camp with his family. And he has a TED Talk that is about his experience in the internment camp. And he is an advocate for making sure everyone knows information about these internment camps. He's even put on a Broadway play about them, and the struggle with these Japanese Americans being very patriotic for their country of America because they are citizens of the United States, but also dealing with what their country had done to them during the war. So a lot of really good primary source information there from Mr. Takai. Okay, so and again, I'll try to find that TED Talk link and put that down below as well. Okay, our last one for social home front stuff is going to be women, right? So we got about 5 million women are entering the workforce during this time. Obviously, we know about Rosie the Riveter. Again, any of these links you see here, I'm going to put down below. Women are working in all sorts of jobs, right? From making bullets, ammunition, airplanes, being secretaries during the war. These women here in the middle are going to be pilots. Now, obviously, they're not pilots during an actual battle, but they are going to be the ones who are going to transport the planes from the factory to the base where they will need to be used. So women are doing a lot of stuff here. World War II definitely is changing the outlook of what women are expected and can do. So this is definitely going to be changing some things. And you're definitely going to see then in the 50s, we're going to start seeing people speaking out a little bit about women's rights, not a ton in the 50s, but the 60s that really is going to ramp up. And then you have the feminist movement of the 60s and 70s. Right, so definitely kind of starts off those roots there are in World War II. right? Our last topic here, we're going to go battlefronts and then we're going to go to some conferences after the war. Again, this is going to be a really brief overview of a lot of the battles, but again, we're only going to focus on battles that are going to be major influences for the United States. Okay, so we'll start off with Europe. Okay, then we'll move to the Pacific. So for Europe, we have D-Day, right? D-Day is the turning point for the war in Europe. This invasion into Normandy, France is going to be led by Dwight D. Eisenhower. Here's Dwight Eisenhower here. Later in the 1950s, he will become President of the United States. So with this major invasion, this is going to help push the Germans out of France and again have that turning point in Europe. The clip that is going to be down below for this is from the movie Saving Private Ryan. If you wish to watch that movie and you have access to it, go ahead. The first 30 minutes are of that D-Day invasion. And to kind of give you an idea of accuracy is Spielberg, when he made this movie, he made sure that veterans of D-Day were able to view it first. And when they viewed it, a lot of them had to leave the theater because they said it was too accurate. It was too much exactly like what they remember the event to be. So that definitely gives you an insight to the accuracy of the beginning part of that movie. Right. The war in Europe is going to be over in April. Right, Germany will surrender. What ends up happening is that we have the fall of Berlin, where the United States will invade Berlin, Germany from the west, and the Soviets will invade from the east. And they're coming together in that city. Definitely will show you who controls parts of that city after the war. So think like Berlin Wall dividing that city. Also in April, so this invasion and surrender happens when Hitler dies. And then also in April, after the war is over in Europe, FDR will die. Okay, so April is a big month of when lots of things are changing. FDR died on April 12th of 1945. Okay. And so when we go into Berlin, this is also when the German concentration camps are going to be liberated by troops. We knew about the concentration camps, but we did not know the extent of what was going on in those camps until we liberated them. Eisenhower shows his really good leadership by actually having photographers and some people with movie cameras come into the camp so they could be recording exactly what they were finding and what they were seeing because it was so atrocious that he wanted to make sure that no one could ever say that it didn't occur, it didn't happen. So definitely a good decision there from Eisenhower, showing his good leadership. Okay. However, the war is still happening in the Pacific, and the president now is going to be Harry Truman. So here we have a map. It's a very good map here of showing us the expansion of the Japanese into the Pacific. So this red line that you guys can see here, right? That line is how far the Japanese are going to control into the Pacific, right? And so they're going to control U.S. possessions like the Philippines and Guam, right? And also then get into the Marshall Islands. So here's Guam, here's the Marshall Islands, here's the Philippines. They're going to be stopped this advancement at Midway. So Midway Island is here, right? And that's going to be at the Battle of Midway. There is a new movie that came out it's called Midway. It is a really, really good film. It's fairly new, so I don't know how much access people might have to find it. But as far as accuracy, it was really, really good. And I would highly recommend it if you want to get a better picture of what's going on with that particular battle and the how like General Nimitz is trying to coordinate different things. But again, really good battle, or a really good movie for that battle. The Japanese will try to control some of the Aleutian Islands here in Alaska, right, in that archipelago chain. And then the idea was that if they took over Midway, then the next group would be Hawaii and then the western coast of the United States. So this Battle of Midway is going to be very important. All right, so for our Battle of Midway, it is the turning point of the war in the Pacific. So good way to remember it is that it's midway through the war. So nice kind of play on words there. And the whole idea of taking over all these islands is the strategy of island hopping. Remember, we have to get closer and closer to Japan, and we don't have the technology to refuel, for long periods of time, so we have to have a lot of those refueling stations. So that is what we're trying to do. And obviously Japan had already taken over our territory of the Philippines and Guam, so we're trying to take those places back. Okay. Of the different battles here we are going to look at, all right, we got the Battle of Iwo Jima, right? The Battle of Iwo Jima goes along with these two pictures here, right? So this is the raising of the flag over Iwo Jima, and then that became the Marine Memorial at Arlington Cemetery in Washington, D.C., is that same image. So you've probably seen this image before. This battle is a 30-day battle over a small volcanic island, and when we are fighting this battle, we realize that the Japanese will never give up. We are going to either kill or capture the different leaders during this battle, the different commanders, and their troops don't give up. They keep fighting. There's even stories of Japanese soldiers on remote islands throughout the Pacific that didn't know the war was over in 45, and they're still at their posts ready to fight. And so this battle is our proof, at least proof from Truman, for Truman, that if we would invade Japan, the people would have that same mentality of never giving up. And it was estimated that 1 million American lives could be lost if we invaded the home island of Japan. So the Battle of Iwo Jima, we definitely want to connect that to the decision to use the atomic bombs, because it was that decision, it was that battle that kind of helped Truman make that decision, right? The Battle of Okinawa, we are closer to those home Japanese islands, and that's where we're going to start seeing kamikaze pilots, which are suicide pilots. Now, with this particular battle, you can definitely see that the Japanese have become desperate, that they realize that the Americans are getting too close, right? And so they're resorting to more drastic tactics and measures. Right? The atomic bombs, we will only have 2 of them, and again, it's avoiding invasion of Japan. Right, Truman actually will drop leaflets across these cities telling people what we are going to do. The Japanese government told the people that they were all American lies, and so they did not take our warnings. So we are going to bomb 2 different cities. On August 6th is Hiroshima. Both of these cities are factory cities. So we did not bomb, like if we wanted to bomb to destroy a lot of people, we would pick Tokyo. But we do not pick that for these atomic bomb sites. So we're picking factory locations. So Hiroshima is bombed. The Japanese do not give up because they think this is a new technology. The Americans only have 1 of these. We only had 2. Okay, so if they would have called our bluff the second time, war could have continued on. So 3 days later, we will bomb Nagasaki, and that's then when the Japanese will give up, because they think that we have more of these bombs than we actually do. Okay. When the war is officially over in August of 1945, we have Victory in Japan Day, or VJ Day, and we have this famous picture here from Times Square. Okay. Our last topic here is going to be a little nod to some world history things, and we're going to look at the wartime conferences. And so always when you look at their pictures, we got to know who these people are. So we got Stalin, FDR, and Churchill. Right, so we'll start off with the big 3, right? Okay, Stalin, FDR, and Churchill, right? And the big 3 are going to create the Tehran Conference, which is in November of 43, right? And this is where they're going to come up with the plan of how to liberate France and how to invade Germany to end the war. So this is kind of like they're coming up with all the plans, right, at the Tehran Conference. Towards the end of the war, so February of 45. Remember, the war in Europe is over in April. The whole thing is over in August. Okay, and at the Yalta Conference, so this one, you should remember this name from world history, hopefully, right, is that this is the agreement for what are we going to do after the war. And one of the big things is dividing up Germany. So they're dividing up Germany into 4 different zones, and then the actual city of Berlin will be divided also amongst those 4 different countries. Right, we're also going to create the United Nations, which obviously is going to replace the League of Nations, and we still have the United Nations today. Okay, the Post-on Conference, we're going to have a new big 3, right, because Churchill's been voted out and FDR has died. So we have Stalin, we have Truman, and we have Adelaide. Okay, still same three countries. Okay, and so this Post-on conference again, July of 45. So just before the war is over, they're going to demand this unconditional surrender to Japan. This is where they come up with like, hey, we're going to drop these leaflets to warn them, and unfortunately it doesn't work. And then they also start organizing the Nuremberg trials, which are the trials that are going to try the Nazis for war crimes. If you've taken AP psychology, you have definitely talked about the Nuremberg trials and kind of the idea that a lot of the soldiers that were the Nazi soldiers were saying, I was just following orders. But again, some really interesting information that's going to be from that particular topic. All right. And I know, guys, this was a really, really brief version of the Second World War. But again, we want to go over the major big ticket items. This is actually going to be our last formal notes video, because remember the AP exam this year is only going to the end of period 7, which is 1945. So I am going to have some different quizzes and things like that for you guys, to kind of go over information, make sure we have that good understanding of those things. And then we will turn in our period 7 packets. Remember that those have already been shared with me on Google Drive, and Google Docs and stuff like that. So basically I'm just going to give you, there's going to be a due date on the blog. I think it is next Wednesday, the 22nd, which is Earth Day. We're going to make sure that those are turned in, and then I can go ahead and grade those for you guys, and then we will start working on reviewing information, doing practice, essays, etc. for that AP exam. So again, if you got questions throughout any of the video, definitely send those to me on Remind or in an email, and definitely make sure you are clicking on a ton of those video links in the description down below, because again, there's going to be a lot of information in there, because it's better to watch a video that has some animation or actual video from these people at the time period, than just having me talk to you about it. But again, send me those questions, and hopefully all of this stuff makes sense. And yeah, all right, so keep working on your stuff. You guys are doing awesome. All right, bye-bye.